She was locked tight into the $4,800 custom leather seat of a Gulfstream G700, tail number N990PB. She should have been sipping champagne aboard this $65 million ultra-luxury jet. Instead, heavy-duty zip ties were cranked down around her wrists, biting into her skin until they drew blood. Outside, a torrential downpour at Morristown Municipal Airport in New Jersey seemed intent on washing away the sins of the tarmac. In the bleak darkness, the strobe lights flashing from the wingtips looked less like aviation signals and more like grim reapers blinking in the storm. A threat to national security, Captain Dale Mercer barked. 22 years of pulling the yoke, 2 Air Force commendations, and an ego larger than the hangar he was parked in had blinded him completely. He genuinely believed he was a hero, safeguarding a billionaire's asset. But Dale Mercer had no damn clue. He couldn't see what was staring him right in the face. This young girl in the faded gray hoodie, clutching a battered canvas backpack with soaked bricks dripping onto his floor. She was the sole reason this aircraft even existed. Crash! The chain link, perimeter fence, tore open. A black SUV slammed through the south security gate, tearing across the tarmac like a streak of lightning and leaving scorched tire tracks on the wet asphalt. The doors flung wide before the engine could even cut out. That wasn't airport security. That was her father. He was the kind of man who never raised his voice when he was truly furious. Instead, he went dead silent. A suffocating, lethal silence, and Captain Dale Mercer was about to be taught a lesson that money couldn't buy, but one her father would absolutely use his wealth to enforce. A lesson with a price tag the pilot couldn't possibly fathom. The morning had started the way all bad mornings do, with someone deciding they already knew the answer before asking the question. It was a Wednesday in late November, 6:47 in the morning, and Morristown Municipal Airport sat under a low, gray ceiling that pressed the rain down like a fist. The kind of cold that didn't just chill you. It got into the seams of your jacket and stayed there. The tarmac was slick and dark, every puddle reflecting the amber glow of the hangar lights in fracture Tuesday. Parked at the private terminal operated by Apex Aviation Services was the crown of the fleet, a Gulfstream G700, tail number N774CW. White fuselage, navy accent stripe, the initials CW in brushed chrome just forward of the engine cowling. It was a machine built to make distance feel like nothing. New York to Los Angeles, without so much as clearing your throat. New York to London on a full night's sleep. It had cost more than most people would earn in 17 lifetimes. Captain Dale Mercer stood beneath the wing, inspecting the main gear struts, and he was not in a good mood. He was never in a good mood before a flight. His first officer, a younger man named Kevin Adler, had learned this the hard way over the past 14 months. Mercer conducted his pre-flight like a prosecutorial cross-examination, looking for problems because he believed problems were always there, hiding, waiting for someone sloppy enough to miss them. Left main looks low, Mercer said into his headset, his voice a flat blade. Pressure's within limits, Cap. I checked it at 6:15. Check it again. A pause. Yes, sir. Mercer stepped back from the gear and scanned the perimeter. He had read 3 security briefings in the last month about unauthorized tarmac incursions at private terminals along the eastern seaboard. Climate protesters, social media stunts. He had flagged 2 of those incidents in an email to the terminal manager and received a reply that said, essentially, we appreciate your concern, which was the corporate equivalent of a pat on the head. He was watching the fence line when he saw her. She came from the direction of the fixed base operator building, walking at an unhurried pace across the wet tarmac, head slightly down, a phone in one hand and the strap of a heavy canvas backpack in the other. She was young, early 20s most, black. Her hair was in braids that the rain had soaked through, and she wore a faded gray hoodie, at least 2 sizes, too large, paint-stained sweatpants, and sneakers that had seen better days sometime around the previous spring. She walked toward the G700 the way someone walks toward a city bus, not in a hurry, not looking around, comfortable with the destination. Mercer's chest tightened. He stepped out from under the wing. "Hey." The word came out like a command. She didn't look up. Mercer moved to cut off her path, planting himself between her and the air stairs, with the practiced certainty of a man who had done this before, or believed he had. I said, "Stop." She pulled an earbud from her right ear. Her eyes met his. They were dark, calm, and completely unimpressed. There was no startle, no apology, no instinctive deference, just a level, patient gaze that for some reason made Mercer's jaw tighten. "Can I help you?" she said. "You can help me by stopping right there and telling me who you are and what you're doing on a secure tarmac." "I'm a passenger. I'm early, I know." "A passenger." Mercer let the word hang in the air between them like a stain. He looked at her, really looked at her, the hoodie, the backpack, the sneakers with the left sole peeling at the toe. "On this aircraft. Yes, my name is, I know, the manifest." Mercer stepped closer, close enough that she would have to take a step back or hold her ground. She held her ground. The Whitmore party. Mr. Whitmore and 3 associates. Business professionals. Not, he stopped himself, but not quickly enough. "Not what?" she said, her voice quiet. He redirected. "Not unaccompanied individuals who don't check in through the terminal. Not people who walk across the ramp without an escort. You want to show me a credential? A boarding confirmation? Anything?" I was getting my phone to pull up the email. She raised it slightly. "If you'd let me..." "Don't reach into that pocket." She stopped. I was reaching for my phone, which is already in my hand. "The backpack. Don't reach into the backpack." She looked at him for a moment. Something moved behind her eyes, something careful and contained, like a door being gently closed. "Okay," she said. "Okay. Captain." She glanced at his name tag, Captain Mercer. "I understand this looks unusual. I came through the FBO." The woman at the desk waved me through. "My name is on the passenger manifest. Naomi Whitmore. If you will call the flight coordinator." "I am the flight coordinator on this aircraft," Mercer said. The APU on a nearby Cessna kicked up its whine, and he had to raise his voice slightly, which did not help his tone. "And I am telling you that your name is not Whitmore. The Whitmores are a family I have flown for 4 years. I know their people. I know their guests. You are not among them." Naomi Whitmore pressed her lips together. "Stay calm," she told herself. "You know how this ends. Just stay calm." "Check the full manifest," she said. "Naomi Christine Whitmore. That's me. I have a driver's license in the front pocket of my bag if you will just allow me to..." "Step back from the aircraft. Captain. Step back, now." He reached for his radio. "Apex ground. This is Gulfstream 774 Charlie Whiskey. I have an unauthorized individual at my position, south ramp, requesting security response immediately. Captain Mercer." Her voice had changed. Not louder, colder. "You are making a mistake. The only mistake on this ramp is whoever let you through that door." He pointed at the FBO building. "You're going to wait right here until security arrives. Don't move." She didn't move, but she also didn't look away from him. Kevin Adler appeared at the top of the air stairs, leaning out of the cabin door. He squinted through the rain. "Cap? Everything okay?" "We need to start the checklist." "Stay in the cockpit, Adler. She doesn't look like..." "I said stay in the cockpit." The shout bounced off the hangar wall. Adler vanished. Mercer turned back to Naomi. And that was when she made the mistake of reaching into her hoodie pocket. She was reaching for a folded printout. A reservation confirmation, actually. The kind the FBO had given her when she checked in 20 minutes ago, with her name on it in 14-point font. She had been going to hand it to him quietly. Let the paper do what words apparently couldn't. She never got the chance. "I told you not to move." Mercer lunged. He was a large man, 210 pounds, and he moved with the blunt momentum of someone who believed completely in what he was doing. His hand closed around her wrist. He twisted her arm back and to the side with a motion that was too practiced to be accidental. She went down onto one knee on the wet asphalt, a cry tearing from her throat before she could stop it. "Stop resisting," he barked. "I'm not resisting." She was trying to breathe. The angle of her arm was wrong. Her shoulder was screaming, "You're hurting me. Please, stop." Moving. He pulled her other arm back. From the tactical pouch on his belt, the one he'd been told 3 times by the management company was inappropriate for a commercial flight crew. He produced a pair of heavy plastic flex restraints, yellow, the kind used for cargo containment. The sound of them closing around her wrists was a zip, clean and final. "That's assault," she said, gasping. "You just assaulted me. You assaulted a flight crew member by reaching for concealed materials on a secure tarmac," he said. "That's a federal offense. You're going to sit inside this aircraft until law enforcement arrives, and then you're going to explain to them what you were doing out here. Please." Her voice cracked on the word, and she hated it for cracking. "Please just call the number on the manifest. Just call it." One call. He didn't call it. He hauled her to her feet by the back of her hoodie and walked her up the air stairs. Stephanie Marsh had been a flight attendant at Charters for 11 years. She had seen first-class passengers throw tantrums over ice cube shapes. She had seen a tech billionaire's wife lock herself in the lavatory for 3 hours over a seating dispute. She had witnessed, at 38,000 feet, things that would reclassify the phrase "difficult client" permanently. She had never seen a handcuffed, rain-soaked, crying young woman dragged through the forward galley door of a $65 million aircraft. The crystal water glass she was carrying hit the galley floor. The sound of it shattering was the only sound in the aircraft for 1 full second. "Captain Mercer," Stephanie breathed. "Trespasser," Mercer announced, breathing hard. He sounded triumphant. That was the part that would stay with Stephanie for years. The triumph in his voice caught her on the ramp. She reached into her bag on a security alert. "I'm detaining her until Morris County gets here." Stephanie looked at the girl. The zip ties biting into her dark wrists, the tear lines on her face mixing with rain. The canvas backpack that had been kicked to the foot of the stairs. She looked expensive, in the way that people who don't need to try hard look expensive. The camera strap visible over her shoulder. The backpack was Filson. The sneakers, despite the wear, were New Balance 992s. Stephanie opened her mouth. "Clean that glass up," Mercer said, not looking at her. "Now." She closed her mouth, and here is the part that Stephanie Marsh would think about every night for the next 3 months. She cleaned up the glass. She told herself she had no power here. She told herself Mercer was the captain, and captains had authority, and she needed this job, and she would lose it if she interfered. And maybe she was wrong. Maybe she was reading the situation incorrectly. Maybe there was a protocol she didn't know about. She told herself a lot of things. The truth was simpler. She was afraid. Mercer shoved Naomi into seat 2A, the principal seat, the owner's seat, the one with the extra 3 inches of recline, and the crystal tumbler holder built into the armrest, and told her to sit still. "I can't sit without falling sideways," Naomi said. Her bound hands were pinned behind her back. Every time the aircraft rocked slightly with the wind, she had to tighten her core to keep from tipping over. Please just cut them off. I won't move. I promise you I won't move. You'll sit how I tell you to sit," Mercer said. He called Morris County Airport Security on his radio. He told them he had a hostile trespasser in custody on the south ramp. He asked them to bring a K-9 unit because the suspect had a bag that might contain hazardous materials. A bag that contained a laptop, a mirrorless camera, 2 film school books, a portable charger, and a folded copy of the boarding confirmation with Naomi Christine Whitmore's full name printed on it in clean black ink. Naomi sat in the owner's seat, with her hands bound behind her, and looked out the oval window at the rain on the tarmac. She was 23 years old. She had a 3.9 GPA at USC's School of Cinematic Arts. She had been on this aircraft 11 times. The monogram on the tail, CW, stood for Carter Whitmore, her father, the founder of Whitmore Capital Group, whose current assets under management stood at $2 billion. She had been awake since 4:30 that morning to catch this flight. She pressed her thumbnail into her palm until she could feel her pulse there, hard and certain. She breathed. Then she looked at Mercer. "I am going to give you one more chance," she said, her voice steady in a way that seemed to require effort. "Call the owner's direct line. It is listed in the aircraft operations file under emergency contacts. Call it." Mercer leaned against the forward bulkhead and crossed his arms. "Mr. Whitmore is a busy man. I'm not interrupting his morning over a stowaway's bluff. I am not a stowaway." Each word came out separately, precise and careful, like she was setting them down where they wouldn't break. "I am Naomi Christine Whitmore. That aircraft has my father's initials on it. My face is on the tablet in the cockpit. It is the wallpaper on the navigation iPad. My father put it there himself, as an emergency identification measure. Specifically because he travels with family members and wanted the crew to be able to recognize us." Mercer said nothing. Naomi watched his face. She watched the small shift happen there, a flicker, fast and almost invisible, where logic briefly opened a door in his certainty. She watched him look at the tablet through the cockpit door. She watched him choose, very deliberately, to not walk the truth to confirm it. "Nice story," he said. Something hardened in Naomi's chest. Not rage, something colder. The specific, exhausting cold of being told that your own existence requires more proof than you are able to provide. She said nothing. Outside, a pair of headlights swept across the tarmac, then a second pair. Then, a black Escalade moving at a speed that was several miles per hour past what airport regulations permitted, driven by a man in a suit who did not care, followed by a Morris County police cruiser that had apparently decided to escort rather than intercept. Kevin Adler, watching from the cockpit window, said very quietly, "Oh no." The footsteps on the air stairs were not hurried. That was what Mercer noticed first. He had expected running, police, security, the controlled chaos of law enforcement arriving to take his trespasser off his hands. Instead, there were measured footsteps, deliberate and unhurried. The kind that belonged to someone who had never needed to rush because the situation always adjusted to accommodate them. Carter Whitmore appeared in the cabin door. He was 61 years old, silver-haired, wearing a charcoal wool overcoat that had been made for him by a tailor in Charlotte. He was not a physically imposing man. Medium height, lean, the build of someone who ran 5 miles at 5 in the morning, not because he had to, but because he had decided to. What was imposing about Carter Whitmore was the absolute stillness of him. He stood in the doorway, and he did not look at Mercer. He looked at the shattered crystal on the galley floor. Then he walked past the galley. Then he stopped. The silence that came out of him in that moment was not empty. It was full. It was a silence that had mass and temperature, and the temperature was somewhere near absolute zero. "Naomi," he said. His voice was the voice of a man who had learned, over decades, to keep the most important things very quiet. She looked up. "Hi, Dad." He crossed the cabin in 4 steps. He knelt on the carpet in front of seat 2A, and he put his hands, very gently, on her forearms, looking at the yellow plastic biting into her wrists. He turned her hands over. He saw the red welts. He saw the broken skin on the left wrist, a thin line of dried blood. He saw the bruise already forming on her right forearm, where she had gone down onto the asphalt. He did not speak for 3 seconds. When he stood up and turned around, Dale Mercer took an involuntary step backward. He had never, in 22 years of flying, seen a human face arranged in quite that configuration. It was not the face of anger. Anger is loud and gesticulates. This was something quieter and infinitely worse. This was the face of a man conducting a calculation. "Captain Mercer," Carter Whitmore said. "Mr. Whitmore, sir, I want to explain." "Be quiet." The words were soft. They were also not a suggestion. "I was protecting the aircraft. She had no ID. She was unauthorized on the ramp. She reached into—" I said, "Be quiet." Carter took one step toward him. "Just one. That is my daughter, Naomi Christine Whitmore. She was listed on your manifest. Her photograph has been on your cockpit tablet since the moment this aircraft was registered to my family. She has flown on this aircraft 11 times. She walked through the FBO like any passenger would, and the desk attendant, who recognized her, waved her through." He paused. "So I am going to ask you one question, Captain, and I want you to think carefully before you answer it." He tilted his head. "When you looked at her and decided she did not belong here, what, specifically, was the information that led you to that conclusion?" Mercer opened his mouth. "She didn't look like—" He stopped. Tried again. "The profile of our usual—" Stopped. "Given the security environment, I had to assume—" "She didn't look like what?" The words dropped into the cabin like stones into still water. The rings spread out. Adler, pressed against the cockpit doorframe, looked away. Stephanie, still holding a shard of crystal, pressed her back against the galley wall. A Morris County officer, who had followed Whitmore up the stairs, stood in the doorway, hand resting on his belt, watching. Mercer finished the sentence in the only way it had ever been going to end. "She didn't look like someone who belonged on a plane like this." Carter Whitmore was quiet for 2 full seconds. "Cut those offer," he said. "Now," Mercer fumbled for his multi-tool. His hands were shaking. He dropped it. He picked it up. He moved toward Naomi. "Don't touch her." Carter's voice didn't change volume. It didn't need to. "Kevin, get out here." He had wire cutters in his hand before the words were finished. He had found them in the first aid kit while Mercer was still arguing, which told its own story about what Kevin Adler had been thinking for the last 17 minutes. "Carefully," Carter said. Adler snipped both restraints with hands that were steadier than anyone expected. The plastic sprang away. Naomi gasped, a small, involuntary sound, as the blood rushed back into her hands. She pressed them together in her lap and breathed. Carter took her hands in his. He looked at her wrists. He looked at the mark on her left wrist for a long time. Then he looked at Mercer. "Officer," he said to the man in the doorway. "Sir, I want this man removed from my aircraft. I'm pressing charges. Assault and battery, unlawful restraint, false imprisonment. My attorney will be on the phone in 4 minutes." The officer, a sergeant named T. Holloway, according to his badge, looked at Mercer with the expression of a man who had just understood that the thing he'd been told on the radio and the thing he was seeing in front of him were very different events. "Captain Mercer," Holloway said, "I'm going to need you to come with me." "I was acting under security protocol," Mercer said. His voice had gone strange, thin and high, like air escaping a pressurized container. "I had every right." Unauthorized personnel on a restricted ramp, refusing to identify. "She offered to show you." Three times, Adler said. Everyone in the cabin turned to look at him. Kevin Adler was 29 years old and had been terrified of his captain every day for 14 months. His voice was not entirely steady, but he kept going. "She asked to show you the boarding email. She asked to show you her license. She asked you to call the manifest coordinator. You told her not to reach for anything because she might have a bomb." He paused. "She doesn't have a bomb. She has a Filson bag with a camera in it. I could see it from the top of the stairs." Mercer stared at him. "You are finished in this industry," Mercer said. "Probably," Adler said. But I'm not the one in handcuffs. Carter Whitmore pulled out his phone. He dialed from memory. It answered on the second ring. Carter. I was about to call you. The voice on the other end was clipped and professional. Randall Oakes, president of Prestige Jet Management, the company that staffed and managed the aircraft. I've been monitoring the security call logs. Your captain zip-tied my daughter on the tarmac in front of 3 witnesses and a security camera, Randall. Dead silence. He assaulted her because he decided she didn't look like she belonged on a jet with my family's initials on the tail. She has broken skin on her left wrist. She has a bruise forming on her right forearm. She has been sitting bound in seat 2A for the last 22 minutes. Carter, God, I don't, is Naomi. Here is what is going to happen. Carter's voice had the texture of something that had been compressed over a very long time under very great pressure. Dale Mercer is terminated as of this moment. Not suspended. Terminated. For cause you will put it in writing before this aircraft leaves the ground. Done. He's done. I'm doing it right now. You will file a mandatory incident report with the FAA within the hour. You will request an emergency review of his airman certificate and his medical certification, citing a documented pattern of inappropriate use of physical restraint against passengers. If you do not file it yourself, I will retain outside counsel to compel it. I'll file it personally, Carter. You have my word. And Randall. Carter looked directly at Mercer, who had gone the color of wet concrete. I want you to go back through every flight log Dale Mercer has filed in the last 5 years. Every incident report. Every passenger complaint that was logged and then quietly closed. I want to know if my daughter is the first person this man decided didn't look like she belonged. A pause on the line. I'll pull the records today if I find out she wasn't the first, if I find out there were complaints before this that your company buried. I will pull all 7 aircraft from your management contract, and I will tell every operator I know why. Carter waited. Are we clear? Crystal clear. He hung up. Sergeant Holloway had been standing patiently in the doorway through all of this. Now he cleared his throat. Captain Mercer, let's go. Mercer looked around the cabin, at Adler, who was looking at his shoes, at Stephanie, who was looking at the wall, at Naomi, who was looking directly at him with the calm, unflinching gaze she had held through the entire encounter. The gaze that had infuriated him from the first second, the gaze he had tried to break with a twisted arm and a zip tie, and the full weight of his authority, and which had not broken. This isn't over, Mercer said. Captain. Holloway put a hand on his arm. Let's go. They walked him down the air stairs and into the rain and into the back of the police cruiser. The door closed. The cruiser moved away across the tarmac. The amber lights reflected in the puddles and then were gone. Inside the G700, Carter sat next to his daughter. He put his arm around her shoulders carefully, mindful of the bruising. She leaned her head against him. Outside, the rain kept falling. It was Naomi who broke the silence, and she did it without speaking. She reached into her canvas backpack, which Sergeant Holloway had returned to her, confirmed as containing a laptop, a camera, 2 books, and a portable charger, 0 hazardous materials, exactly as she had said, and she pulled out the camera. It was a Sony FX3, a cinema camera. The kind that film school students who were serious and whose parents were extraordinarily supportive used for thesis projects. She pressed play. The footage had been running in the backpack the entire time. The angle was wrong, hip level, pointed slightly upward, shaky when she went down on the asphalt, but the audio was flawless. The G700's APU was a distant drone in the background. Mercer's voice was front and center, clean and clear and damning in every syllable. She didn't look like someone who belonged on a plane like this. The cabin was completely silent. Adler pressed the back of his hand to his mouth. Stephanie had gone pale. Carter's jaw was a line of compressed granite. The footage ran for 4 minutes and 11 seconds. It captured everything: the first stop, the demand to stand down, every refusal to let her show ID, the moment she went to one knee on the wet asphalt, the zip of the restraints, the drag up the stairs, and, caught in a moment when the camera strap had spun slightly, one clear second of Mercer's face as he marched her through the rain. Not furious, not afraid, satisfied. The face of a man who believed he was doing exactly the right thing. When the footage ended, no one spoke. Naomi pressed a button and removed the memory card. "Sergeant Holloway," she said, standing, "I'd like to submit this as evidence." Holloway, who had come back up the stairs when he heard the playback, took the card in both hands. He looked at it for a moment. Then he looked at the door of the cruiser where Mercer sat, then back at the card. "Yes, ma'am," he said. "We'll need a statement, too, if you're up to it." "I'm up to it," she said. Carter watched his daughter standing in the forward galley of his aircraft, wrist wrapped in the compression bandage that Stephanie had finally found the courage to offer, giving a precise and detailed statement to a police sergeant about the exact sequence of events. Her voice was even. Her recollection was exact. She did not editorialize. She did not raise her voice. She stated facts in the order they had occurred, and every fact was on the memory card, and that was that. He had never been more proud of anyone in his life. The video was on Instagram by the time the G700 was over Pennsylvania. Naomi posted it herself from 38,000 feet on the aircraft's Ka-band Wi-Fi. She didn't add music. She didn't add a filter. She typed a caption that was 4 sentences long and contained her full name, the tail number of the aircraft, the name of the FBO, and the phrase, "This is what flying on your family's plane looks like when the crew decides you don't belong there because of what you look like." She posted it, powered down her phone, and ate the breakfast that Stephanie had prepared with a kind of focused, trembling attentiveness that suggested she understood she was doing penance and was not yet sure it would be enough. By the time they crossed the Mississippi River, the video had 800,000 views. By the time the G700 touched down at Van Nuys Airport, the number had passed 4 million. The internet did not wait for courts. It rarely does. The footage was the kind of footage that did not require context or explanation. It explained itself, in Mercer's own voice and face, in 4 minutes and 11 seconds of 4K resolution. The freeze frame of Mercer's satisfied expression became the image. Not the takedown, not the confrontation, just that face, that certainty, that complete, settled assurance that he was right. CNN ran a segment that evening. The headline was, "Private Jet Crew Restrains Passenger," who turned out to be the owner's daughter. The anchor used the phrase "deeply troubling" and played the footage twice. TMZ was less measured. Billionaire's daughter, zip-tied. By pilot on dad's own plane. Video. Mercer, released on his own recognizance from the Morris County prosecutor's office after processing, arrived home to find 2 news vans parked on the street outside his house in Parsippany. He closed the blinds. He turned on the television. He watched his own face play across every channel. His wife, Sandra, sat across the living room from him with her arms crossed and said nothing for a very long time. "I was following security protocol," Mercer said. "Dale." The tarmac was a restricted area. She had no visible credentials. "In this environment, you cannot afford to." "Dale." Sandra's voice was flat. "You zip-tied a 23-year-old woman on her own father's plane because she was wearing a hoodie. She wouldn't identify herself. She tried to identify herself 4 times. I watched the video. Everyone in the country has watched the video." Mercer said nothing. "We are going to lose everything," Sandra said. She did not say it with anger. She said it with the exhausted precision of someone who had already done the math. "You understand that, right? The pension, the house, everything." On the television, a legal analyst was explaining what Carter Whitmore's law firm, Dunbar and Kessler, one of the three most feared civil litigation practices in the northeastern United States, was likely to do to Dale Mercer's personal assets given the documented evidence. Mercer picked up his phone. He should not have picked up his phone. He called a local news anchor he had met at a fundraiser the previous year and agreed to do an interview. Carter Whitmore watched the interview from his office in Century City. Standing at the floor-to-ceiling window with his hands clasped behind his back and the expression of a man watching a wildfire he has decided not to put out. Naomi sat on the sofa behind him, with her wrists in compression wraps, watching the screen. The anchor asked Mercer if he had overreacted. Mercer said, "Look, you have to understand the environment I was operating in." It was a dark, rainy morning. She was approaching from an unauthorized direction. She was in what I'd call non-standard attire for a private aviation client. And when you're responsible for a $65 million aircraft and the safety of its occupants, you cannot afford to assume. You act on what you see. Non-standard attire, Naomi said quietly. Carter turned from the window. He picked up his phone. He called Patricia Dunbar directly, not through an assistant. "Patricia." "Carter, I've been watching." Patricia Dunbar had a voice like a contract being signed. The interview was a gift. Non-standard attire is going to look beautiful in front of a jury. We're going to trial. We are absolutely going to trial. Civil assault, battery, unlawful restraint, negligent infliction of emotional distress. And I want to add a Title II civil rights claim based on the totality of the documented conduct. The interview establishes that his worldview has not changed. That matters for punitive damages. What else? I want to subpoena Prestige Jet Management's full employment records for Mercer. Every flight, every incident report, every passenger complaint. I want to know if he has done this to anyone before. Carter looked at the television. Mercer was saying that in this day and age, if you see something, you say something, and he stood by his decision. And Patricia Carter said, "I want a full record request from the Morris County Prosecutor's Office on the criminal matter as well. I want to make sure those charges do not quietly disappear." "They won't disappear," Patricia said, "not with 4 million people watching." The records came. They took 6 weeks in a court order, but they came. And they told a story that was worse in the specific way that patterns are always worse than incidents, than anything that had happened on that tarmac in November. 3 complaints in 11 years. The first in 2018, from a black investment banker who had boarded a charter flight in Houston, wearing business casual clothing instead of a suit, and been asked to produce his credentials twice. Then been seated by Mercer in the rearmost position, despite having a confirmed front seat reservation. The complaint had been marked resolved, meaning someone had made a phone call, and the client had been told they were sorry he felt that way. The second, in 2021, from a South Asian physician who had arrived at a Teterboro charter on behalf of her hospital's medical transport account and been told by Mercer that he needed to speak with her supervisor before she boarded. The supervisor, when reached, confirmed everything, and the physician boarded 40 minutes late. She did not file a formal complaint because she was afraid of being blacklisted. She had told a colleague about it. The colleague was deposed. The third, in 2023, was from a black tech entrepreneur who had chartered a Prestige jet flight under his company account, arrived in athleisure wear, and been questioned by Mercer for 11 minutes about the legitimacy of his booking while other passengers boarded. He had also not filed a formal complaint. When asked why, in his deposition, he said, "Because I didn't think it would make any difference." He said that in the deposition room, and then he sat quietly for a moment, and the court reporter noted in the transcript that there was a pause before the next question. Patricia Dunbar included all 3 depositions in the amended complaint. Carter read each one. He did not share them with Naomi until he had read them himself. Then, he sat next to her on the sofa in his Palo Alto home on a Sunday evening in February, and he put the folder on the coffee table and let her read them at her own pace. She read each one twice. When she was done, she sat for a while with her hands in her lap. "He never thought anyone was going to stop him," she said. "No," Carter said, "because no one ever did." He didn't answer that. He didn't need to. The trial lasted 9 days. The criminal plea came first. Mercer's attorney, reading the room and the room's 4 million documented witnesses, negotiated a guilty plea on simple assault and unlawful restraint in exchange for no incarceration, 3 years of probation, 600 hours of community service, mandatory counseling, a permanent entry in the public record. Patricia Dunbar was in the civil courtroom the following month, and she was not interested in deals. The jury saw the footage. They saw the deposition of the physician who had boarded 40 minutes late. They saw the deposition of the tech entrepreneur who hadn't thought it would make a difference. They heard the recording from Mercer's interview, where he said non-standard attire with complete comfort and no apparent awareness of what he was actually saying. They deliberated for 4 hours. The verdict included $180,000 in compensatory damages and $1. $4 million in punitive damages, a number that the jury foreperson, when asked by a reporter outside, said was meant to send a message rather than simply balance a ledger. Prestige Jet Management settled a separate negligent supervision claim for an amount that was sealed, but was described by a source familiar with the settlement as significant. The company also announced a complete revision of its crew vetting and incident reporting protocols. A new mandatory bias awareness training program was implemented across all staff. Dale Mercer's FAA Airman certificate was revoked, pending a full psychiatric evaluation. The evaluation found no clinical diagnosis, but documented a pattern of rigid authoritarian thinking and poor impulse control under stress that the evaluating psychologist concluded made him unsuitable for command authority. The certificate was not reinstated. He could not fly. The career that had taken 22 years to build lasted 22 minutes past the moment he pulled those flex restraints from his belt. Sandra Mercer filed for divorce 4 months after the verdict. She got the house and the remaining portion of their retirement savings that the civil judgment hadn't touched. Dale moved into a 2-bedroom apartment in Hackensack, above a dry cleaning operation, and took a job as a shift supervisor at a fulfillment warehouse in Kearney, New Jersey, where he stood for 8 hours at a stretch and managed a team of 22 who largely did not know who he was or care. His supervisor was a 26-year-old woman named DeShonda, who scheduled his breaks and called him Dale and expected the work to get done on time. He called her ma'am. He did not know what else to call her. He had lost the vocabulary of authority, and what replaced it, slowly and painfully, in the long fluorescent hours of the night shift, was something he had not expected. Doubt, not performance, not strategy. Just the slow, grinding recognition that he had looked at a young woman with wet braids and paint-stained sweatpants and made a decision in the first 3 seconds, and then defended that decision against every piece of evidence that contradicted it, and that the decision had never been about security. He was 57 years old. He stood at the end of a conveyor line and taped boxes. And once, 3 months into the job, he found himself watching DeShonda walk across the warehouse floor, efficient, certain, carrying the clipboard like it was just part of her hand. And he thought, I would have questioned her too. The thought sat in his chest like something cold and foreign. He put it on the shelf next to the other things he was learning to hold without dropping. The documentary premiered at the Sundance Film Festival in January, 8 months after the morning at Morristown Municipal. It was called tail number, and it was 47 minutes long, and it was not about Dale Mercer. That was the thing people got wrong in the coverage leading up to the premiere. They expected a takedown film, a viral moment stretched into feature length. What Naomi Whitmore had made was something different. She had spent 8 months interviewing Black professionals about the specific, grinding, invisible tax of being perpetually required to prove that you belong in spaces that have already decided you don't. Pilots, surgeons, investment managers, a federal judge, a woman who had built a software company from a kitchen table to a $200 million valuation and still got asked in meetings whether she was catering. The viral footage appeared in the film. It appeared for 90 seconds, near the beginning, without commentary. And then Naomi's voice, not the voice of the young woman on the tarmac, not scared and gasping, but the clear, directed, cinematic voice of a filmmaker who knew exactly what she was doing, said, "This is one morning. This is one incident. This is 11 times the people in this film have had mornings like this, and most of them have no footage." The standing ovation lasted 4 minutes. A distributor acquired it before the credits finished rolling. On the evening of the premiere, Carter and Naomi sat on the terrace of the house in Palo Alto. The hills were dark shapes against a lighter dark sky. A plane moved through the high air above them, its beacon a slow pulse, and Naomi watched it until it was gone. She turned the camera over in her hands. The Sony FX3. There was a hairline crack in the bottom corner of the LCD screen from when it had been kicked across the tarmac, and she had decided not to repair it. "I heard he's in a warehouse somewhere in Jersey," she said, not with satisfaction, just as a fact. "He is," Carter said. "Is he going to be okay?" Carter looked at his daughter for a moment. "I don't know. That's up to him." Naomi nodded. She kept her eyes on the sky where the plane had been. "I don't want him to be destroyed," she said. "I wanted him to understand." "I don't know if those are the same thing." "They're not," Carter said. "I know." They sat there in the quiet for a while, and the hills were dark, and somewhere below city, the lights of a million lives were going on as they do, without acknowledgement, without drama, one after another, into the night. Finally, Naomi set the camera down on the table. It caught the light in its cracked screen, a small, imperfect rectangle of reflection, holding nothing and everything at once. "I have a second film I want to make," she said. Carter picked up his glass. "Tell me about it." And she did. If this story stopped something still inside you, not because of how it ended, but because of something you recognized along the way, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And leave a comment. Have you ever been in a room where someone decided before you opened your mouth what you were worth?
I read every single one.